The crystal clink of cutlery against porcelain was too clean for a night like this, too bright and brittle, like laughter at a funeral that no one had the courage to call by its name. The restaurant's lighting dripped warm honey over our tablecloth, gilding the edges of a lie so polished it almost shone. 10 years married, and all I wanted was a quiet booth and a gentle conversation that would feel like a return home. Instead, Rose insisted on inviting a friend, the kind of friend who sits across from a husband with a smile that looks like a dare. Troy's grin wasn't big. It was small and efficient like a blade, just enough curve to nick the edge of good faith, to draw a bead of doubt, to watch it flower. I'd been pretending not to notice the months of drift, the midnight showers, the phone face down, the sudden importance of spin class, the new perfume that didn't smell like anything she used to like and yet clung to the collar of a shirt I didn't recognize. I told myself I was paranoid, told myself husbands who hover become husbands who lose, told myself the marriage had dips and plateaus like any mountain worth climbing. But that night before the appetizers landed, she winked at him, blink and miss it bold, a spark flicked in a dark cinema, and every lie I had told myself burst like film set aflame. A wink can be nothing, a tick, an eyelash caught sideways, but some winks are a verdict delivered in silence. I couldn't hear the room for the sound of my own blood, a surf breaking and breaking and breaking against the inside of my skull. I kept my hands flat on the table, palms cooling against the linen so I wouldn't shake, so I wouldn't flip the table or stand and roar with the barn-red fury that flashed across my vision like sirens. Pain can teach a man ritual. I took a sip of water and let the glass touch my lip as if it were a sacred chalice, as if I could drink down the ache and swallow it into obedience. Rose lifted her flute and smiled across the rim, beautiful and practiced, and I watched that smile fall apart by fractions as I pushed a velvet ring box into the pool of candlelight between us. Her fingers hovered as if the box might bite. Troy stopped breathing, that's how it seemed. He went still, pupils pinprick small like a pupil caught in a flash. Rose's breath came back in a soft laugh, the reflex of someone who has rehearsed gratitude in mirrors and learned how to cry without smudging mascara. She opened the box and found nothing, the kind of nothing that mocks, the kind of nothing that is not empty but brimming with everything a person refuses to name. "Where's the necklace?" she asked, the note of delight curdling, the brightness bleeding out of her voice like dye chasing itself through water. "You said." "I changed my mind," I said gently, as if explaining the weather to a child who wants to picnic in rain, as if my voice alone could keep the storm from breaking. "I found a different gift." I reached into my jacket and set a small USB drive beside the empty box, a second offering with less ceremony and more truth. Rose's smile snapped off like a switch. Troy's knee knocked the leg of the table quiet, but not quiet enough. "It's a highlight reel," I said, still soft, still kind, the kind of kindness that grows teeth in the shadows. Moments that matter. I thought we could celebrate properly. The restaurant had a private room with a bare wall, and the staff, in their immaculate black and whites, had offered a screen for our anniversary montage when we arrived. I had nodded, I had thanked them, I had tipped a head. Now I stood and carried the small projector to the wall, hands steady, breath like glass, the world narrowing to a white rectangle that would either save me or end me. The first photograph arrived in a soft click. Rose laughing under a street lamp, Troy's hand braced high on the brick behind her head, the untidy intimacy of two people who forget to hide unless a camera tells them to. Click. Rose exiting his building in a hoodie that wasn't hers. Click. Troy in our driveway on a Tuesday when I was on a flight to Denver, his sunglasses reflecting my front door like a dare set in mirror lens glass. Click. The hotel elevator selfie from the girls' trip last summer, except there were no girls, no trip, just two faces pressed together like a secret praying never to be dragged into the sun. The photos were not obscene. They were worse. They were casual. They were the kind of casual that only happens when two people have rehearsed the choreography of each other's days, the kind of casual that becomes a second marriage inside the bones of the first. The video was short, a condensed cruelty. I had not needed to watch it twice to understand everything. Still, I had memorized every shadow on the wall, every off-screen laugh, the way his voice dropped when he said her name like a password. She watched herself loving him in a room I recognized by the lamp I'd chosen for our guest room. Her face went pale under the sugared light of the restaurant's chandelier, as if she'd been powdered with ash. Troy, who had the gall to attend like a +1 to my heart's autopsy, folded in on himself, chin to chest, a boy hiding in a man's suit. I paused the projector on a frame of her hand at his jaw, thumb pressed to the space where I used to press mine to soothe, to quiet, to promise that the day's ugliness couldn't cross this threshold. 10 years, I said, the words careful, as if cracked porcelain could be carried if lifted just so. I thought we were building something that could hold our weight. Troy stood. "We should talk," he began, and the sound scraped along my spine like a fork dragged over bone. I was already moving, the chair legs shrieking against the floor like metal on metal, a siren in a sterile room. My fist lodged in his shirt front and found the beating animal beneath, hot and frantic. The wall accepted his shoulder with a dull thud that made something inside me answer with a low, old satisfaction. People gasped, the room shrank. "You ate at my table," I said, breath fanning his cheek, the smell of his cologne suddenly obscene, too close, too intimate. "You smiled at me while memorizing the turn of her key in your lock." The second shove was harder. The third was a punch I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks, delivered with a precision that surprised me with its lack of tremor. He folded, soundless, a suit collapsing onto itself. The staff came, hands gentle and insistent, the choreography of crisis they must practice in back rooms when no one is looking. Somewhere, someone called the police. The manager's voice was low and urgent. A woman at the next table whispered, "God," like a prayer she wasn't sure where to send. Rose was on her knees beside the fallen figure of our future, sobbing into hands that still wore the wedding set I had salvaged from my mother's jewelry box, a legacy turned ornament turned weapon. I looked at her and felt something enormous unhook and fall away inside me. Not rage, not grief, but a clean vacancy, a room after a tenant gone, dust dancing in a shaft of light. I pulled off my ring and let it fall onto the hardwood. It made a small sound, a soft ping like a bell struck from very far away. "Congratulations," I said, the word tasting of iron. "You won." When I stepped into the air outside, the city was loud and indifferent, and it felt like mercy. There are nights that end a life without killing the body. There are nights that let a man walk out alive and call it freedom. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that I had started. The morning paper chewed my name into a scandal, small but efficient, a grim little story made for breakfast mouths and office whispers. Man ruins anniversary dinner. Police intervene, local consultant transported, minor injuries, no charges pressed pending review. The photos online were worse, grainy, phone-lit, a vein thick in my neck, Rose's face blurred but unmistakable to anyone who had ever loved her, Troy's tie loose like a white flag no one accepted. My phone swelled like a hot coal with texts I didn't read and calls I didn't answer. The mind is a projector. Even with the screen off, it plays. I went to my office because habit is sometimes a safer god than healing. The receptionist did not meet my eyes. She offered a glass of water with both hands, as if handing a man a clean thing could wash a dirty moment. I shut my door and sat in the quiet, and listened to the HVAC breathe like a sleeping animal behind the ceiling tiles. On my desk was the blue folder I'd meant to open the night before, mortgage refinance options, a life measured in rates and terms and numbers that don't weep when neglected. When Rose's first voicemail came, I let it pour through the speaker into the room like a scent. "I'm sorry," she said in the voice she used for broken vases and late dinners, the voice that assumed I would forgive because forgiveness had been our currency, cheap and plentiful. "Please," I panicked. "I made a mistake. I made many mistakes. I don't know who I am without you." The second message had more air and more tears, and the brittle edge of someone who's begun negotiating with a god they don't believe in until the house starts to burn. I did not reply. Silence can be a knife a man learns to wield after slicing himself open with every word he once flung to save what could not be saved. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote a single document titled Inventory, and I began to list everything I could not carry into whatever life waited. My side of the bed, Sundays in her parents' kitchen, the sweater that always smelled faintly of her hair even after a wash, the playlist we built in our first year, the stupid inside joke about the neighbor's yappy dog, the photograph of us under the last snowfall before her father died. By the end of the list, the document looked like a museum catalog of tenderness made extinct. At noon, my lawyer called, voice clinical and warm in alternating measures like a good doctor who knows the difference between bedside and battlefield. "If you're certain," she said, "we can start with dissolution and keep it amicable if possible." The word amicable felt obscene. I tasted the syllables, found no flavor, and nodded into the quiet. "There's also the matter of evidence," she added, and I understood she meant the drive, the photos, the video, the pile of hurt I had curated like a curator of my own museum of rupture. I signed what she sent. I did not let myself reread. The city's afternoon light leaned different across the office carpet, and I remembered the day I proposed to Rose, the way she had cried softly at the park while a violinist we'd hired under a pretense played the theme from a French film she loved. I had promised us a life then, and I had meant it with the seriousness people reserve for vows and bridges and children. I wondered if intention was the only part of a promise that mattered, and if the outcome was just a cruel punchline attached by a universe too busy to proofread. Troy's firm posted a statement: "We do not comment on personal matters. We remain committed to our clients and our community." People commented anyway, Strangers rinsed their mouths with our names and spit them back out in little judgments that felt like gravel in shoes. A friend texted, "He's suspended. Internal review. Whole office knows." Another, "He'll land. Men like him always do." I went home because there was nowhere else to go that didn't smell like me. The house opened like a wound reluctantly sutured. Everything was where it should be, which meant everything hurt exactly where it sat. On the kitchen counter, a bowl of oranges we bought 2 days earlier glowed with ridiculous optimism. I picked one up and pressed my thumb into its skin until the oil lifted, until the scent cut through me like a blade sharpened on childhood. She arrived without knocking, keys still in the habit of a life not yet reprogrammed. We stood on opposite tiles of a kitchen we'd picked for its light, and she said my name like she was invoking a spell she didn't understand anymore. Up close, guilt had rearranged her face into a map I did not recognize. The girl I married was there, under the weathering, but she had learned a new language and forgotten to bring a dictionary for us both. "I was lonely," she said, lips trembling, and I nearly laughed because loneliness is a thing people carry into crowded rooms and secret beds as if it can be cured by a different pulse under the fingers. "You were traveling, you were tired, we stopped talking. Loneliness," I said, "is a country we got citizenship in together." I watched the words land and bruise. "You didn't need a passport stamped in someone else's mouth." Her breath hitched. She reached for my arm and let her hand hang there the way a limb hangs over a cliff when the drop is too long to measure. "Please," she whispered, "please don't do this. We can fix it. I will do anything. Burn my phone, quit my job. Switch cities, start over." There are moments when mercy is the crueler choice. I looked at the oranges and the sunlight and the magnet photo of us at the pier where the Ferris wheel made us look like brave children and felt the tectonic fact of a life shifting under me. "I believe that you're sorry," I said, "and I believe that I'm finished." She folded, not physically, but inward, the way a flame folds when a window opens, bending to a wind it cannot name. She nodded too many times. Tears fell and darkened the tile like a quick rain. When she left, she took nothing but her purse and the sound of our door learning a new way to close. That night, I slept on the couch because our bed had a way of telling the truth in the dark. I dreamed of a river with no bridge and woke with my jaw aching from holding back words. In the blue hour before dawn, I wrote a letter I never sent, full of the small kindnesses that kill and the large hurts that cannot be forgiven. The house listened, and for once it did not speak back. The first week without her, the house was an acoustic experiment. I clapped once in the hallway and learned how silence behaves in empty spaces. I ate toast over the sink not because I was a man undone, but because plates felt like a ceremony I had not earned. Friends came in threes, as if grief needed witnesses to qualify, and they brought soups and advice packaged with sincerity and a thin film of fear. The fear that whatever disease had eaten my marriage could be airborne. My sister called every evening and pretended not to listen for the sound of a bottle. I poured water loudly to reassure her. Work tried to fold me into its arms, which is to say it tried to drown me. I let it because drowning is sometimes easier than learning to walk on a beach where all the footprints lead in circles. I met with my lawyer twice, and each time she said, "This can be clean if you let it." And each time I nodded in the careful way a man nods when someone asks him if he can breathe underwater. Troy vanished from the city like a stain scrubbed from stone. Rumor put him at a cousin's place, then at a short-term rental near the river, then nowhere at all. Rose sent one last message. "I'll sign, I won't contest. You deserve peace," and then she obeyed the silence I had set like a fence around my life. The public story crackled out. The private story settled in like fog that the sun doesn't bother to fight. One evening, I took a walk along the boulevard where the river holds the city and refuses to let it drift. The water looked like bruised velvet, dark and soft and heavy, with everything dropped into it that did not know how to float. A street musician played a song I could not name, and a boy on a scooter nearly clipped my knee and apologized like a person who knows that collision is the only way people notice each other anymore. I stood on the footbridge and imagined tossing my phone into the dark and giving myself the gift of being unreachable forever. That's when I saw them. Not Rose and Troy. Ghosts are crueler and more efficient, but a couple in the same posture, the same tilt, the same conspiratorial lean of two heads bent to share breath people call secret. It wasn't them, of course, it didn't matter. Memory had learned to wear other faces. When I got home, I opened the blue folder again and drew a line through "Keep the House." The house was a mausoleum with great natural light. It deserved a family who didn't look at the hallway and see a battlefield map. I called a realtor in the morning, and she walked through each room with brisk compassion, naming values like a priest naming sacraments. "It'll move fast," she said. "People love a corner lot with a mature maple." The second week, I boxed our wedding album and every photograph that remembered us as a before. I left out exactly one image. Rose asleep on the couch years ago, a paperback tented on her chest, her mouth parted in a way that radiated unguarded trust. I did not know why I kept it. Grief collects relics, and not all relics are curses. On a Sunday, I met a man in line at the coffee shop who recognized me from the restaurant's viral clip and pretended he didn't. He hesitated, then said, "It gets better," and I said, "I don't need it to get better. I need it to get different," and he looked at me like I'd handed him a small, sharp truth he didn't know what to do with. We took our coffees to separate tables and worked on separate lives. On Monday, the police called to ask if I wanted to press charges retroactively. I declined because the violence hadn't restored me, and punishing the body that helped commit my harm would not heal the part of me that had volunteered to believe. "Understood," the officer said, with the tired grace of a man who has learned that justice is often a story people tell to help them sleep. After I hung up, I wrote a sentence on a yellow sticky note and stuck it to my monitor. "Do not romanticize your own pain." The night before the house went on the market, I heard a car idle outside too long. I drew the curtain back an inch and saw a shape I recognized. Shoulders I loved before I counted the bones that made them. Hair I had brushed away from a forehead before I learned it could bend toward someone else mid-laugh. She didn't come to the door. She didn't need to. We had reached the part of the story where presence is a language and absence is its grammar. I went to bed and dreamed of building a house with no doors and waking up happy inside it. Escalation is not always volume. Sometimes it's proximity, a threat inching across a floor a man has just mopped clean. The listing went live. The Maples staged itself in perfect October. The house performed a version of itself that was easier to love. Showings filled the afternoons. Couples walked through and said, "I could see us here," and I nodded and tried not to tell them about the ghosts. The first offer came over asking. The second came with a letter from a woman who wanted to raise her daughter in a neighborhood with trees that teach patience. I took the second. 2 nights later, my front window bloomed with a soft star I didn't understand until I smelled smoke. The kitchen towel on the counter had somehow kissed the candle's tongue and learned to scream. I smothered it with a pan. The fire sighed and went flat, leaving a black hibiscus branded in the towel's belly. I opened the window. October came in and laid cool hands on my cheeks. My heartbeat took a long time to remember its job. It wasn't sabotage. It was an accident, the kind that happens when a mind tries to live 2 lives at once. Still, I stood in the dark and imagined Rose letting herself in, lighting 100 candles, leaving a note that said, "Pick me." Imagination is a thief disguised as a saint. The next morning, my lawyer called. Her counsel wants a meeting to present terms. I said yes because saying no would be another kind of yes, the kind that drags. We met in a glass cube high enough above the street to make pedestrians look like punctuation moving through a sentence. Rose arrived in a navy dress with sleeves that apologized on her behalf. She sat with her hands folded like a student who has finally learned she cannot charm a grade into changing. Her lawyer spoke in numbers and distributions and assets and retirement accounts, and I watched a decade become arithmetic. When it was our turn to nod or shake our heads, we nodded the way tired people nod. Quickly, grateful for the end of any sentence. Then in the hallway afterward, when the air was thinner and kinder, Rose said, "I don't want your money," and I laughed without humor because pain makes people brave with theatrics. "I don't want yours either," I said. "I just want out." She stared at the carpet pattern as if it could rearrange itself into a map leading us back to the beginning. "He left," she said, and I understood she meant Troy, and I understood the shape of a story that folds on itself at the end like a paper swan dunked into water. He said he never meant to ruin a marriage. He said it got out of control. People don't fall into other people's mouths by accident, I said, and the cruelty of the line flashed hot across my face like a slap delivered to myself. "I'm sorry," I added, and I meant it, and I didn't, and both were true. She nodded and touched the wall with her fingertips like a blind person learning a room. "I will spend the rest of my life learning how to hold this without begging you to carry it for me." It was the most honest thing she had said since the night everything broke. We stood in the hum of other people's commerce and let a decade begin to end. The decree came 3 weeks later with the plainness of a grocery list. I signed my name so many times it separated from itself and became a drawing someone else made of my hand. The house sold. I packed the last box. I stood in the foyer and thanked it for holding a version of me I no longer needed. I left the keys under the mat and walked down the steps into a street that felt new because I let it. The new apartment was small and bright and honest. The walls smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The radiator hissed at night like a cat pretending to be fierce. I learned my neighbors' names by how they laughed. I learned the bus schedule by heart because schedules are a rope a man can climb when his arms give out. I bought a plant that looked like something that had survived deserts, and I promised not to overwater it. On Sundays, I walked to the market and bought pears that bruised if I looked at them wrong. I carried them home like precious things and ate them over the sink because sweetness is messy if you let it be. I joined a boxing gym not to hurt something, but to be a body in motion that learned the difference between impact and violence. On the third week, I forgot to think about her for a whole hour, and when I noticed, I did not punish myself. One evening, my phone lit with an unknown number and a voice that pulled the floor an inch to the left. Troy. He spoke quickly, the way a man speaks when silence has been a prison and he is desperate for parole. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I just needed to say I'm sorry. I was selfish." I told myself I was in love to make it holy. It wasn't holy. It was hunger and opportunity. Hearing his voice in my ear felt like letting a wasp land on my tongue. "I don't have anything for you," I said. "I don't have hatred left. I don't have forgiveness you can spend. We are not two men on a phone. We are a fire I put out." He exhaled a sound like a chair scraping back. "I lost my job," he said. "I'm moving." He waited for me to fill the silence with a blessing. I did not. "Take care," he said, and the line went flat. That night, the river wind lifted and rattled the apartment's one loose window like an old friend trying to get in. I stood there and let the draft cool my face and realized the anger had gone quiet, like a dog that used to bark at everything, but now just lifts its head and lowers it again, tired of false alarms. In its place was something humbler. A small, stubborn wish to build a life that did not require revenge to taste like relief. I found a therapist who looked at me like I was not a story to be solved, but a man in a chair with hands that needed somewhere to go. We talked about the myth of control and the poetry of repair and the physics of grief as a force that obeys conservation, not destroyed, only changed in shape. She asked what I wanted, and I heard myself say, to be ordinary, and we both smiled like people who know that ordinary is the bravest word some days. The night the maple turned fully gold, I met Rose at a cafe because some endings prefer daylight. She had asked to return a box of things. A scarf I thought I'd lost, a first-edition paperback we bought at a yard sale, the small porcelain crane we kept above the sink because its ridiculous delicacy made us gentler in the morning. We sat at a table near the window. The sidewalk played out our city in small moving parts. She looked like someone who had learned to kneel without collapsing. "I'm not here to ask again," she said, and the relief of that uncoiled a fist inside my chest I hadn't known I was making. "I wanted to hand these to you with my hands and tell you that I am sorry, and I will be sorry, and I am learning how to be sorry in a way that is useful and not needy." She placed the crane on the table. It stood on one porcelain leg and pretended it understood balance. "I loved you," I said, present tense failing me, past tense feeling like a door that swings softly on a hinge that will never again lock. "I might always love the you that lived in the house we left." My voice was calm. There is a point beyond fury where the air clears and a man can speak as if narrating weather. She nodded and we sat with our coffees cooling into the kind of temperature no one prefers. "I don't forgive myself," she said. "Yet, maybe never, not the way forgiveness is sold, but I am building a life that accounts for what I've done. I am not a child asking the world to be a soft place." We walked after, not touching, two people who once wore the same skin now politely sharing a sidewalk. The sun paused on the lip of the buildings and then slid down, and the city's lights came up like a curtain shift between acts. At the corner we stopped, and I realized the ache in my chest felt less like loss and more like a new room I had not furnished. "This is where it ends," I said, not cruel, not dramatic, just true. "Thank you for what was real." "Goodbye," she nodded once, and tears brightened her eyes without falling, a mercy for both of us. She turned left, I crossed to the right. The city accepted our choice with the indifference that makes it bearable. At home, I placed the porcelain crane on my windowsill and realized the gift I'd given her on our anniversary. The empty box, the drive, the public reckoning, had not been my real gift. The real gift was leaving. The real gift was the life that grew in the crater after impact, the quiet garden planted in ash. I stood in my small, honest apartment and felt something like gratitude sprout, awkward, tender, alive. Outside, the wind threaded itself through the city's bones and made a music no one could own. I turned off the lights and let the dark say my name the way night says every name. Evenly, without judgment, with a promise that morning is a reasonable expectation. When sleep came, it was not mercy and not escape, it was simply sleep. And when I woke, the room held, and so did.